Hello, in this video, we're going to take a look at how to get a Spanish visa in 2025. It's aimed at US citizens and US residents, although it might apply to others too. So with that, let's dive directly into the video. So here are the four things most people consider when looking at moving to a new country. This includes the visa options, the affordability, the quality of life, and financial impacts. We'll take a look at each of these in turn. So, six of the common visas that we see mentioned on YouTube channels include the Golden Visa, the non-lucrative visa, the work visa, the student visa, the entrepreneur visa, and the digital nomad. Now, things have changed, and we're going to dive into each of these briefly. So, the Golden Visa officially ended in April of 2025. So, this really is not there anymore. So, that brings us down to five visas, but these are still pretty good options. For the non-lucrative visa, the things you need to have are you need to be over 18 years old, you need to have a clean criminal record, you need to have a medical certificate, private health insurance, a place to stay, and sign a document that says that you will not be working. In addition to that, you need to show that you have income to live in Spain. And that is to show that you have 2,400 euros monthly if you're traveling by yourself. And if you've got a spouse or a dependent, you've got to have 2,800 euros in total for the two of you. That's what it takes to get a non-lucrative visa. And often this is used by retirees. We'll come back and take a look at this later. Next, we have the work visa. The work visa requires a job offer from a Spanish company or a Spanish employer. You must have certain required qualifications and a clear criminal record, health insurance, medical certificate, and a place to stay. So if you can find yourself a job in Spain with a Spanish employer, that's one way to get to Spain with a work visa. The next one on the list is the student visa. This is an interesting visa. It doesn't mean that you have to be young. What's important is that you must be accepted into a full-time program, perhaps in a master's or an undergrad or a doctorate. You need to have proof of finances, and this is a different tier. In the previous example, you needed to have 2,400 euros. In this situation, you need to show you've got 600 euros a month for yourself. And if you have a dependent or a spouse, then you need to have 450 more for your spouse. So it's 600 for you, and it'll be 1,050 for the two of you. Now, the good thing about this visa is that students are allowed to work up to 20 hours per week. You, of course, need a medical certificate, health insurance, and a criminal background check, but this is an interesting way to get into the country and figure out whether this is going to be your new home. And next, we have the entrepreneur visa. Once again, you need to be over 18 years old. And once again, the income requirements are interesting. You need to show funding of at least 600 euros monthly for yourself and another 300 if you have a spouse or a dependent. So that's 600 for you or 900 for two of you. Now, the hurdle here is that you need to have a business plan that's approved by the Spanish Economic and Commercial Office or a similar office that's on the list of visa applications. Now, there's no minimum investment amount. Of course, you need a clean criminal record, private health insurance, and a place to stay. What's interesting about this is that 600 euro a month limit compared to the 2,400 you need for the earlier non-lucrative visa. Next, let's take a look at the digital nomad visa. You need to show proof of remote work and about 2,800 euros monthly income from remote work, or 3,800 if there's two of you. Again, you need to be over 18, have a clean criminal record, private health insurance, and a place to stay. So looking at these six visas that are often touted on other channels, you might want to note that only five of them are available as of April of 2025. That's a non-lucrative, the work visa, the student visa, the entrepreneur, and the digital nomad. And next, let's take a look at affordability and quality of life. These two are often intertwined closely. And some say that some of these are better than in the US, but clearly some people do return home. So there's a difference of opinion, and it's a very personal thing. The first thing people love is that healthcare is excellent and it's at a lower cost. Spain is ranked among the best globally for healthcare quality and accessibility. The next thing people often talk about is lower stress and a slower pace. And they say they're not worried about the next health issue or event bankrupting them or putting them in debt. The slower pace has two sides to it. It's nice and slow, but if you're trying to get an appointment for something, that's also likely to be a little slower. Next, we talk about lower everyday costs for groceries, dining out, and transportation. And then there's affordable housing in many locations in Spain. And many of these towns and cities are excellent for walking, so walkability is highly touted. And then again, there's public life. The towns and cities often put together events that you can go participate in the public, and there's cultural access. And then there's climate that suits your lifestyle, whether you want to be on the Atlantic coast in the north, the Mediterranean coast on the south, or the drier and warmer central plateaus around Madrid. And now let's take a look at financial impacts. While we touched on these indirectly under the prior three topics, in this segment, we're focused on those with more assets. And to be in that higher net worth asset category, we're talking about someone with a home that's valued at, say, $500,000 or more, an IRA pension balance or a 401k balance that's a couple of $100,000 or more. And you fall into these buckets because these unique laws can affect you differently than if you lived in the US. Did you know that Spain has a forced heirship law that can override your will? All children have a claim to a portion of your estate. Now, our partners at Wealth and Borders offer a free newsletter aimed at higher net worth immigrants, and we'll provide a link below. They agreed to let us share some excerpts from their book, Spain, the High Net Worth American's Playbook for Relocation and Lifestyle. Now, these excerpts are related to forced heirship, wealth taxes, income taxes, and inheritance taxes. So let's get to that. The book that they published is here. It's Spain, the High Net Worth Americans Playbook for Relocation and Lifestyle. Their newsletter touches on many of the elements covered in this book. But here's an excerpt that speaks specifically to Spanish forced heirship, or called legitima. Let me take a look at this document here and let's walk through this. At the top, it talks about the complexities of inheritance tax and Spanish succession law. And it's deeply rooted in these forced heirship rules known as la legitima. And this is different from the US model of free testamentary freedom, which means that you can do whatever you like with your assets. So, what is forced heirship? It's a principle that says certain pieces of your estate go to certain people, regardless of what your will says. If we look further down, it says, who are the forced heirs? The primary forced heirs are typically children and descendants. Now, if there are no children and descendants, sometimes it can go upwards to parents and ascendants. Let's scroll up a little more. And we can see some provisions for widows and widowers. And then the question is, what is the reserved portion, the la legitima? And it shows you here on page 158 at the bottom, the bullet 1, and on the next page, bullet 2, really explains it. It takes your entire estate and breaks it into three buckets. The first third has to be divided equally amongst your children. The second third can be divided unevenly amongst your children. And then the remaining third is freely disposable. You can do what you like with it. So this complexity is something that means that anyone with higher net worth balances should consult a tax professional, both in Spain and possibly in the US if you have assets in multiple countries. Next, let's take a look at another excerpt. This is a case study of a non-lucrative visa retiree, a couple living in Valencia with 5 million in assets. Now, what's interesting is these inheritance rules and tax rules change depending on the district of Spain you live in. Madrid is the most flexible and easiest in many ways, the Madrid area. Here we are in the Valencia area. If we look at the provisions here, it says they purchase a house for 600,000 near Javia. It's in the Alicante, Valencia region. And they use 1 million of their allocation that they wanted to get into the country, and their net worth is 5 million. So they received combined US pensions of 100,000 annually, and they obtained a residency visa by the non-lucrative visa model. Now, the illustration talks about the process, what it is, the tax residency, because they lived there for more than 183 days. They are Spanish residents. And then scrolling down, we see that there's a wealth tax and an STLF. We won't dive into the STLF here, but unlike Madrid, where it's pretty flexible on these wealth taxes, meaning there's none, in Valencia, there is a progressive wealth tax. So every year, you're required to pay a tax on the wealth you have globally. And this is calculated based on a rate of 1.7% to 3.5% of net worth over $3 million. So once you've calculated that, there are some offsets, and that's once again why you need a tax professional in Spain. Income taxes, the U.S. pensions are taxable in Spain and subject to the provisions of the U.S.-Spain Treaty. And there are some nuances here, whether it's a government pension, a private pension, etc. And 401k and IRA distributions, they all count. So once again, make sure you check with a tax professional because these are all taxable at the Spanish rates where the tiers are much lower. And lastly, at the bottom, it talks about inheritance taxes. And it says there are provisions for spouse to spouse transfers. There are different provisions for parent to child transfers. And in Valencia, the tax rates are higher than they would be in Madrid. That gives you an idea of what's covered in this book by Wealth and Borders. And their newsletter will talk about this applicable to Spain and to other European countries so you can get a more complete picture of what it takes to move to a particular location. So, with that, let's go to the ending of this section. What if you're giving it to a sibling or a niece or a nephew? Much higher tax rates apply. Now, in the US, in 2025, about $13.61 million are tax free from an estate. In Europe, the threshold doesn't work like that. What happens there is it determines how much each person gets. So a person has a specific allowance depending on where you're in Spain. And after that allowance, the remaining parts that you give them are taxed at increasing rates usually. So when you give it to a sibling, a niece, or nephew, that threshold is incredibly low. It's minimal. So pretty much all of the amounts you give to siblings, nieces, nephews, etc., become taxed at a much higher rate. So they get the net amount after the taxes are withheld. And that kind of hits all the points on these two topics. And if this is something of interest to you, I'd suggest you subscribe to the newsletter. We'll provide a link below. So to wrap this up, there are 6 visas often touted, and the Golden Visa was valid until recently in April when it disappeared. And then there's a non-lucrative, the work visa, the student visa, the entrepreneur, and the digital nomad. We touched on these earlier, but I want to reiterate that the amounts required for the student visa and the entrepreneur visa are relatively low at 600 or so euros for you, for an individual. And the beauty is that with a student visa, you can work 20 hours. It's worth checking with an immigration attorney whether or not that 20 hours can be running a business, say a digital business that you might have. And if so, you could quite easily make that 600 euros. So, all in all, I hope this has been helpful, and I thank you for joining us. And I would just note that many people are choosing to leave the US now in protest. And here's our penguin Flippers Up mug that's marketed by an affiliate. Thank you so much for watching.